Okay, so just a quick word if you don't know me. I've been using Alpha far too long, since Alpha 4 version 2 in the good old days of DOS. So I think I could be described as an alphaholic, but it's worked for me. What I'm going to do now, we haven't got a lot of time, so CSS it could be a rabbit hole we can go down and spend days, even weeks trying to go through. But very quickly, just going to demonstrate a couple of ways which Alpha makes it really easy to use CSS and leverage CSS because of the way that you can get under the hood with Alpha anywhere. So you can use CSS, HTML, JSON, JavaScript, PHP, Python, Node, all these different things, but we're focusing on CSS. And what I've done is put together a quick demo. So if I pull this up now, you'll have access to this afterwards. It'll be sent to you by Steve early next week, I think. And what I've got in here is two basic two list controls. I'm focusing on how you can leverage the list controls. If I look at the basic one I've done, and this is a fairly, I would call typical layout. So I've got a panel layout, which is top to bottom. I've got a header, and then I'm using the same naming convention that Lee used, which is I'm naming each of the panel cards. So there's a search one here. And then underneath that, there's the one that contains the list, and the list is set to be fill that container. And then the last one here is I've called it hidden. And then you can see here it's collapsed after this dot, so it's hidden until you call it. We never call it, so it remains hidden. And inside there, I've got the detail view in a window container, and I've called it WF window detail. So if I just show this one, this is just using the standard Alpha CSS style sheet. And you see it does a pretty decent job of putting through. And I point out I'm using the SQLite version of Northwind database to show this. Because I've got the search fields at the top here. I can go and select the search field, the city, and it'll the usual sort of stuff that you can just get right out of the box. I've set it so that we've got pages and we've got pagination, and we can go through it. But the challenge can be with the list controls if you've got a lot of columns, and it can be a little bit problematical getting all the data that maybe a client might want to see on screen. Also on here, I've added an icon just to be able to open up that window to be able to go and edit the record, and under the new record pulls up the same window now, and you can programmatically change what it says there. So it works. It's out of the box and it works. So what I'm now going to show though is one where I've done some work on it. And if I go back to this one, you'll see 35 rows in the actual list. This one's 39. It's got 4 actions, and I'll come back to that. But I'll just show it to start with now. So if I just go into preview that. So it's the same data. It's the same list, but I've applied CSS style into it. So the first thing you can see is we've got a different color header. We've got different color buttons, putting through a bit more information now. I've got the flag based on the country. I've put this in for demo purposes. It could be the photo of Maria Anders or the photo of Thomas Hardy, whatever. And we've got dynamically colored slash at the side. But we now got it, each one is in like a card. But also, if I go back to the basic one, just run that again, you'll see that the standard Alpha CSS class with the hover and that, it's all working. But if I go into this one, there isn't anything. You've got the pulse that shows, so you know you clicked on it. And you can still do the same. But now the pop-up windows styled, button colors, the buttons at the bottom. And I can double click on the row to do that as well. I've also added in here some automation. So if I go and say, let's go and pick Brandenburg, we see it automatically searches straight away. And the new record works the same way with the styling on here as well. So what I want to do first of all is just show how I did the core bit of this row layout. And I've used something called CSS grids. When I first did this, there wasn't any functionality in Alpha to do a CSS grid within it, but Alpha being Alpha, Selwyn being Selwyn, there's now in the ability of the UX component, there is a new container type, which allows you to use CSS grids within a container. I'm doing this within the list though, so it's slightly different. So I show you the methodology I use for this. So first is if I now go and just open up the Chrome debugger, and you'll see if I hover over a row here, you can see that effectively I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 columns and 6 rows. So it looks like an HTML table, but it's not. It's a CSS version of an HTML table, which makes it more responsive than everything else. And to prove that, then if I just scale this down, you'll see as you move in, you get it will completely it will resize itself, but maintain the core structure up to a point. Now, I did use to do this CSS. If I go into the list control, this is not the normal way I'll do it. I'll cover how I would normally place the CSS towards the end, but for the purpose of this demo, to make it work, what I've done is I've checked the optional tab for CSS, and the CSS class is all in here. And I'll show you how I built that out in a second. But the list layout, which is now, if I go to the properties for the list layout, I've now, instead of column, I've gone freeform. And the list layout now is literally a bunch of divs with a class name for each of them. And then with the picking up the field names to put them in, be it a button or whatever, the flag, all that's done through that. So it's really quite simple at this end of it. One of the challenges is getting the CSS grid CSS built, and I use a third-party product for that, and I have done for a while, and it's a freebie, and it's called Layout IT. Let's go back to there. It's Layout IT, which you can get into for free, and it's got a built-in CSS grid generator. Now, I don't know if you noticed when I showed you the Chrome debugger, it was nine columns and 6 rows. So if I just quickly say here the columns, so if I go, that's that 1, 2, 3, there's 9 columns, and that's 3 more rows in here. So I've now got but the way I do it, and I use this, the challenge with the grids is that you might do it uniquely for each particular list that you do. So one of the things you have to do is make sure you've got a naming convention for the CSS. Now, it defaults here. As you build it out, you'll see it's over here. It's actually starting to build out the CSS and the HTML. But the first thing I do is I change the container name. So I'll just go, you see it's already changed that in the HTML. I'm not going to do it all here because it'll take too long. But if I go in here and say that's where I want to have the, so I'll call it test. I'll name it after the same. But I'll say that's the company name and just hit enter. It's now put that in there I spanned across 3 of those grids and 1 row. 3 of those columns in 1 row, and you can see it's actually replaced in here now. It's put that name test container up here, and it's put that test company name in there as well, and it's put it in 3 times. If I now go, the rest of this now is address, and I'm only going to do a couple. If I go into here and say if that's the test contact with the person. And one thing I'm only going to do, I'm just going to put in here test contact label, and I'm going to do in here, I'm just going to go buttons. Now, the other thing I do in here, the last I do in here then is I want to get the layout right. So how I do it on here is that if you click on the ones you've done, you've then got it tells you the grid areas it's placed in, but you've got the justification, the alignment. So in the case of the test company, I want that to be, let's go, I want it to be left aligned, but I also want it to be in the center of that row. But I want that to be the same. In fact, no, I want it to be that at the top, not. So I just literally force it to go left. That one I want to be right aligned. And at the top, this one, I want it to be left aligned. And that one I want to be left aligned. And at the top. So you can see now it's building out the CSS for me. And it's also building out the HTML. So you can copy this over. I'm not going to do any more in here now because it'll take all the session just to go through this. Or the only one I would do maybe is on the test buttons. I would say I want to go right aligned and at the bottom. So if I come back into here and go back into the list, I've just copied and pasted it directly into the CSS for this list. But I called it trainers. I've got training container. And the only change I've made on here is that it uses each column. So you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it's FR, I presume, for fraction. But I've just changed the first one to be 15 pixels and the other one. And you can see here that because I've named all the areas. So training bar is in all 6 rows on the single column, the left-hand column. Training company is in the 3. Training address is in the 3, but all the way down there as well. You do have to do some tweaks on here. And I'll explain those. So for example, it pulls through the start, the center, and the area. You can then